I'm Steve Kassay, the Director of Custom Application and Integration. Mike has already introduced me, but I've been working at GSI for 10 years and have been doing integrations for the last 20 years. So I have been dragged through all of the permeations of integrations. So what I'm planning on doing today is I've broken down integration types. I'm going to go over how they work, what's good about them, what's bad about them, and then I'm going to get into a case study where we'll talk about one specific client using one specific piece of integration software. Integration is like a marriage. It often, when things start out at the beginning, everyone has these wonderful aspirations and ideas on how things are going to happen. But when you start getting into the details, you realize that some things aren't what you expected them to be, and you have to be very flexible. And once you've gotten these integrations up and running, the vendors that you're using to integrate with may change their APIs or something like that, unbeknownst to you, and your integrations break, or if you haven't built them correctly, they fail in the dark and nobody knows about them till, you know, a few weeks later when they try to close your books and you're missing a whole bunch of revenue. So the goal is to make sure when you've put your integration together that this is going to be a long and happy relationship between you, person you're integrating with, and the mechanism that you've selected to do the integration. So I've just thrown out a few of the integration types that are prevalent today. Your basic application to application integration, where you could grab, you have e-commerce platform that needs to talk to your ERP. Pretty straightforward. You have microservices where there are specific things that you want out of third-party vendors, like if you need to calculate tax for Reno, Nevada, you can make a special microservice call to that. There's lots of these types of microservices out there. You know, B2B, like your business partner wants to have real-time inventory and view into your system, or you know, you have EDI transactions that you want to capture. Then we have just basic data that you may want to bring into your system that needs to get massaged. There are, sorry, you may have to connect two of your platforms together inside your data center or your enterprise. You may have Internet of Things, these IoT devices, and your manufacturing machines may need to communicate that, you know, they're up for maintenance, that, you know, they every 30 days they need to get the blades on your cutters sharpened, and it will automatically go and place a service order inside your system. So these are all the types of things that go on. There's, you know, I didn't add robotic process automation. which is another big thing. That's something we also do, where we can take your the repeatable functions and automate those to make your life a lot easier. We have a case study up on a RPA project we did with Power Automate up on our website if anybody's interested. There's big data, which these data lakes in there that you may need to collect information from, then streams, multi-cloud. You get the idea that there are just an enormous amount of things that now today people want to bring into and out of their systems, whether it is bringing it into your ERP, sharing it out with your ERP, or maybe you may have sales and marketing data that need to go to a specific commission software. But what you find now is that you have the option of getting the best of breed software that does what you want it to do to your specifications and integrate it with what other pieces you have. So if you have JD Edwards and you are not happy with the human resource component there, you can go get another vendor to do the HR stuff. If you're in NetSuite and you don't like the way they do inventory, you can bring in another system and bring in and do the integrations with them. I'm going to talk about the 4 basic types of integrations that are out there. There's file-based, which is what has been around for forever, point-to-point, iPaaS, and Enterprise Service Bus. We'll talk about each one of these, why they're good, why they're bad, and then, like I said, at the end, I'll have a case study. I think I skipped right past the file to file because that's not a very interesting integration. People have been doing that for EDI forever. You get an XML file, get parsed, stuck into a table somewhere, and then there is a process that goes and fires off that integration. You can have it FTP data FTP'd and have a program that picks it up and processes it, which is fine if you have something very simple, something that does not ever change, that if it fails because you've built in that level of security on top of it. And they're pretty quick to do, but the problem is, if it does fail, it usually fails in the dark. How do you know? You have to go search for logs. You'll have to go try to figure out why the issues were created. So file transfers, like I said, used to be the only way of doing it till about 15 years ago when they started bringing in the concept of web services, SOAP services, and now REST services. So that brings us to the second iteration of integration, which is point-to-point, where you stand up a web service and it will communicate to other web services. We've left the Latin in here because you know that these are just anything communicating to anything. And you stand up a web service, it consumes data, or you set up a web service and it will send it to another specific web service to consume the data. If you have 3, 4 items you want to integrate with, point to point works out fine. I still do tons of these. They're fairly straightforward, but the problem that you get is you can see with 6 integrations, it's fairly complicated. If you have 30 integrations that you need to do, things become very ugly and very confusing, and it just turns into a big bowl of spaghetti. If you're standing up these services yourself, that means that you got to bring your developers in, and developers will build it out if you have a good spec, but they also may leave. And if they leave, a lot of times I get brought in because we have zombie integrations where the guy that put them together is long gone, and no one understands anything about how that integration worked, why it works, why the decisions were made. Especially with a smaller shop that has a couple of developers, sometimes no one checks their code. They don't have a good development process, and you'll go in and find out the guy didn't leave any comment. So you have no idea why, or why, and especially if it's broken, why it's broken. So it becomes very tedious to debug something. And also the fact that when it's time to modify it, if somebody has gone and changed the way that they're doing authentication, you got to have somebody go in there, find the code, open it up, modify it, so on and so forth. So at the beginning, it's relatively fast and easy to spin up. It's much more flexible than your file format, and it's fairly low cost, depending on how you spec it out. Whenever I look at point-to-point integrations, you don't want it to do too much, because then it becomes bloat code, and that always makes it too brittle. You want to break these things down to smaller chunks, so it's a lot easier to reuse those components if you need to. If you need one that registers a user in a process that when you're placing orders from your e-commerce solution, you might just want to have one service that adds users. You don't want to stick all that code right into your order processing piece, because if you need to then change up how you want to capture these customers, you'd have to go and change your order process. So you have to kind of think about what are these logical chunks that you're going to use and how best to use them. And the cons are, it's hard to scale. these. If you get in an enterprise, you start getting 500 million, billion and above, your needs for integrations are just huge, and it's just tough to go out and standardize them. And as I mentioned earlier, they are somewhat complex to maintain. As the more you bring in, the more painful it is to maintain it. And the vulnerability of overloading the service. I mean, you have to really stress test these things. You'd have to put in mechanisms to make sure that if you get hit with a large load of orders or data points, that the whole thing doesn't crash. So let's talk about iPaaS, which is the next iteration. And I think iPaaS probably started about 10 years ago. And that's integration as a service, a cloud-based software package that will handle your integrations for you in one centralized location. That could be Boomi's product. It could be there's a whole slew of them. Celigo is another one that does a good job at it. Jitterbit is another one. There's a dozen super popular ones and maybe another 20 or so less well-known ones. But conceptually, they all work similarly. In most of them, they have connectors that will connect you to popular systems. Like there'll be a Salesforce connector, a commerce connector, an Amazon connector, and the larger ones like Boomi and Celigo have a ton of connectors, which makes your life much easier because you don't have to go back and read all the documentation on how the native web services work. You just bring in the connector, you put in the security information, whether it's username, password, and token, to connect to them, and then you can build out your integrations. Like in this case, we've got mobile devices coming in and they're talking to their ERP, your Internet of Things. All of them get connected in this software package, and you have one central location where all your integrations are. And if you, when you build them out, you build them correctly, you could build your own error handling module that you can reuse everywhere. So you know if something fails, it doesn't fail in the dark, that you get notified, whether it's sending a call to SolarWinds, your log analyzer, or whether it sends logs to it, or whether it sends an email out. However you want to configure your notifications, you can make widgets that call out to your microservices, like I've mentioned before about adding a customer or checking inventory or determining freight for your website. Whatever it is, you can build these little widgets inside your integration, and it just makes it so much easier. If you use something like Dell Boomi, and I will do the case study is around Dell Boomi, it's a lot easier to find a Dell Boomi guy, and you show him your integration, he can say, okay, I understand this, or I can figure out why there's a problem, versus having to bring in somebody that has to analyze 3,000 lines of custom code. So it makes it a little easier. Navigation, like I said, it's easy for people to figure out just looking at the data workflows, how these pieces, how this information is flowing and what integrations it's flowing in, and whatever logic blocks they put in there, you can look at the logic block and it's right in there. Security's better. These are cloud-based software packages that's they have a whole team monitoring security to make sure that it's secure and not open to vulnerabilities. Where if you're doing something like a point-to-point, those responsibilities become part of your enterprise IT needs. So you're kind of passing off that security level off to your iPaaS software vendor. Access is a lot easier. People don't have to VPN into your system to make modifications to your code or whatever. However, you have your enterprise secured. These people you can give them access. These iPaaS solutions are all cloud-based, so you can just log in and review those workflows on the cloud. One of the problems is picking the right iPaaS solution provider. There are, like I've said, there are about a dozen popular ones, and then the second tier, there's maybe about 20. So you need to make sure that you're getting the right one to do the task that you want. If you're using Magento as your e-commerce solution and NetSuite as your ERP system, you want to maybe look at something like Celigo, because that's got some really good connectors for NetSuite and some really good connectors out to Magento. If you're going to do another one, Boomi may make more sense. If you've got something very simple, Jitterbit may make the most amount of sense for you. Or Zapier. We use Zapier quite a lot too. That's a pretty simple and inexpensive iPaaS solution. But as you get to the more robust, your costs go up, but you also get a lot more features and functions. Then we get to the holy grail of integrations, is a full enterprise service bus like MuleSoft by I think Salesforce bought them a couple years ago. And the way enterprise service buses work, if you're in a large enterprise, it makes a lot of sense that you drop a message onto a message queue saying, for example, you have an order and it has come in. Now, there may be 10 different enterprise applications that need to be notified about it. You might have a commission software package that needs to know about it. You might need to tell your ERP system about it. You may have a warehouse management software package that needs to know about it. So once you drop that message on the queue, which is represented by this piston-looking thing here, it will sit around and broadcast that message, and you set up each one of your integrations to listen for that message, saying, "Oh, that's something that I need to know about," and then the process comes off of that. Where if you don't need to know about it, that listener will just ignore it. So this is a great way of taking super complex integrations and making it much easier to integrate with and to keep control of. But once you get up to the MuleSoft side of things, those implementations get quite expensive, and they're for the really large projects. We had a Verizon reseller that had a bunch of stores throughout the country. We put a MuleSoft enterprise service bus in for exactly that reason. When phones were sold, you had to let a whole bunch of systems know about it, and because cell phones have a tendency of disappearing, there is regular inventory requirements where people have to go in and take daily inventory counts and find out if there's variations. So it was a super complex project. But we used MuleSoft to do that about 5 years ago, and that went over really well. But again, that was a very large team to get that executed. So yeah, the pros, it is super hard to overload the system. Enterprise Service Bus has excellent security. MuleSoft has a really, really intense security level before you can even get access to the queue. It can scale very well. It's constantly getting updated, and that's true also for iPaaS, is that as the software, because it's in the cloud, as improvements put in, the software gets updated. It's easy to use for legacy integrations, and it simplifies your need for support, because everything's a little more transparent. The really licensing cost is the #1 con about it, because they are kind of expensive. And whether the software freezes, I mean, I guess that's true for any iPaaS solution, but those are exceptionally rare. And because you've got things dropped on the service bus, this was probably more true a few years ago, that you'd have a reduction in performance because it has to route through all of through the message queue. But in 2023, just the way cloud computing has developed, that is really less and less of a concern. All right, so those are the types of integrations that are out there. And I'm sure that everybody has used at least one of those, if not a few. I'm going to get into a case study on one of the last integrations we just did between a company called Rarig. They had selected Concur as their invoicing software package. Concur is pretty much known for travel tracking for salespeople, but they also do invoicing. And they had purchased it, and they set up a Boomi integration, and it only worked about 80% of it. So it wasn't really doing the right thing for them. What was ending up happening is that the AP team was spending hours and hours and hours trying to figure out why these transactions weren't getting completed. Why were they failing? And that was because you've got two systems that are trying to communicate with each other, and sometimes the tax dollars weren't matching. Sometimes they were getting an invoice for only some of the items that are on there, and not all of them. So there was all this complications that we needed to figure out and then break it down and automate it. Now, the person that had done the original integration came in and then left, and there was no documentation at all on why the decisions were made. So it was a tall order, because we had to come in and retrace how the system is working now, where it's breaking, and how to fix it. As I was just saying, there was incomplete data. Some of the items were coming in at the wrong time, depending on where they were through the flow. They wouldn't match. So it became a huge nightmare for the AP people. So the first thing we did is we came in, and I'm a visual guy. A lot of people are visual guys, and data integration at the high level is a visual game as well. So we kind of put together a workflow diagram, kind of say, okay, this is how it's working. There's a Concur generated a encrypted CSV file. It got dropped into a file share where Boomi had to come in, decrypt it. It had to analyze the data and figure out which ones were check-based and which ones weren't. It had to open payments, search for items. there's all these little components that Boomi needed to do, and then below it, call services inside of JD Edwards, which is their ERP system, to go and do specific functions. And then above the top, we put a error handling and notification layer. So we know that when there is an issue, it goes and sends out an email and lets people know. That's how they wanted to get notified. The main concern that we had, and it's just a word for the wise, is that when you are building these integrations, Boomi, Celigo, whatever, they're fairly easy to build simple ones, but understanding basic fundamentals of development makes it more likely that you're going to be successful. It's not like you have to write bunches of code. You can do a whole integration without any knowledge of code at all, but you need to understand that everything should have good error handling. The data flows should work in a certain way that you don't get yourself stuck in loops, that you kind of know what you're doing, and as you lay it all out, you're using best practices so that when you want to reuse components, you can reuse components. When you're using items inside of your development environment, you can keep them separated from your production environment. So all these things need to be laid out correctly. So getting somebody that knows what they're doing, or a partner that understands how to lay these out makes a lot of sense. With Rarig, for example, the people that started this thing, it was their first Boomi integration, and our team came in and said, well, you know what, it's probably better if we break it up this way, or this is the way you should probably lay out your different workflows. So all of that stuff just makes it a lot easier to maintain, because again, the idea is that you need to make modifications. It's easy to make modifications. If you need to update something, it's easy to update. If there's a problem, you can go and identify where the problem is really quickly. There's the happy path and the unhappy path, and everybody codes out for the happy path, which is everything works great. And the devil is in the unhappy path, where it breaks, and how quickly can you identify why it broke and how to fix it. So then once we kind of looked at the workflow, we came up with another diagram for them to say, okay, here's how things currently work, kind of laid out their workflow. And then we said, look, and now we've analyzed the problem, figured out where things are breaking, and then we identified where we're going to make the modifications. The AP clerks knew where things were breaking, because they had to go and fix them. So that didn't take a lot of time to identify. But once we did, we're going to say, okay, here we are, we're going to update your workflow. So this is worth so much now for them, because anytime if they want to maintain their own Boomi integration, or they bring somebody else in, they have good quality documentation and then a workflow diagram that kind of lays out how the process should work. Right, and then as I've told you many times, and it sounds a little redundant, the unhappy path, the error handling is hugely important for any sort of integration that you're doing. And doing it in iPaaS makes it a lot easier, because you can, once you've laid out your workflow, you can reuse your error handling modules and just kind of snap those into your workflow process. So if you're doing another integration and you want to integrate warranty information or something like that, you can bring that in and still use your email widget to kind of snap in. Also, you need to make sure that things get tested. We implemented it into a sandbox where we went through and ran through these processes over and over again for about 6 weeks, identifying the errors that were erroring out, and then trying to go back and fix it till we were getting 100%. I think we're at 99% of the time now. We're able to process these things right through the system, which is a huge savings for them. Yeah, so this is kind of how we laid out our diagrams for the rare rig people, just to kind of lay out, what each one of these workflows was doing. Again, just having a quality documentation. So they've reduced the amount of time that it takes to get these items paid out. They've been able to, they're up like 73% faster than they were previously. The AP clerks aren't like shooting themselves up every Monday morning because they have a stack of failed items that they need to work through, so they can actually get on and doing things that that make, that they should be doing, instead of figuring out the basic errors. So it was a huge success there. They were very happy. And I think it was maybe a 90-day process. That was calendar days, not effort. Because it is kind of stop and go for a while. We'll build out the integration, then we're off not doing anything until we run into issues, and we come back in. So it was, fairly quickly we were able to go in and fix a big problem. So that is it for me, for my presentation. If you have any questions, you can put it in the comments.
I had a question while we're kind of fielding questions from those in attendance. You touched on a little bit, but how does it help from a morale standpoint to fix this? Because am I, lots of people have problem solving and they're, catching errors, and if it's not this, it's something else. Do they find that, this part of my job is to find errors and I'm just going to go to a new batch of errors? Or was this something that was really pinning these guys down and a serious source of frustration? It sounds like it sounds like they got it started. They were heading in the right direction, but then, and 80% to the average guy sounds pretty good, if you got B's and C's in high school. But if you're a company, you've got to perform better than 80%, obviously.
Yeah, well, C's get degrees. Yeah, well, yeah, right. But the problem that they ran into is just the busy work of going out, grabbing the XML file, finding the line that failed. Once the line failed, looking at each one of those columns to identify the thing that caused the issue. Then going back to JD Edwards, pulling up the invoice, analyzing both of those things to figure out, oh, well, you know what, they forgot to add time. Or one of the items in the invoice wasn't there, so there was a mismatch. Those things are super tedious. And isn't that the goal of all automation? Is to take the things that are tedious and repeatable and automate those, so you can go in and do other things. You need less people to do more work. And the goal is it to be what they call headless, no human interaction, no human involvement. That the processes just work the way they're supposed to work. And that is the reason why people do integrations. Another customer that has tons of orders that they're manually entering, and we've been talking to them about integrating, building some sort of integration, because that's ridiculous. You have a lot of people that are doing work that they shouldn't need to be doing. Those automations fix that for make it much faster, less error prone, and less.
I think it's interesting that, what's important, and I've heard you talk before, is your reliance on documentation, and that you want to make sure you leave a good document trail, because this may be, hopefully not, but it may be the last time they ever see you. And you also know that the lack of documentation a lot of times is what got you kind of into this spaghetti bowl, if you will.
Yeah.
But I would think that technology is kind of a double-edged sword today. It allows people maybe to get deeper into the woods, but then when they reach a problem, it's maybe harder to get out. Is there an expectation of, when you're brought on board, is there kind of like an unwritten rule of how quickly you need to diagnose the problem, or are you expected to kind of do that pretty quick, or does it just depend? I've always wondered that, is, getting an answer, is that just providing them an answer of what is actually happening, is half the battle almost, and
Well,
how does that work, I guess?
yeah, I mean the working sessions that we put together are always got to involve the people that are actually doing the work. We can't come in and tell you what the requirements are. The customer has to tell us what the requirements are. What are you trying to achieve? Or we have tried this and this is where it's breaking. And then we just go in and dig deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. We supply them with workflow diagrams and documentation saying, okay, this is what you said to us and this is what we heard. Is this correct? And they'll say, well, yes or no. And then we kind of work our way through into at least an approach. And once we have an approach, we go through the iteration phase where we'll put it together, test it, find out if that's working. If it breaks, these are, and I'm just talking the more complex integrations. The simple ones, we can whip out in a day, right? But those are the ones that a lot of the customers can do themselves. It's the more complex ones where we have to analyze lots and lots of data that can vary, and depending upon what they need to do with it, matching certain items, like in the case that I just showed you, matching the appropriate invoice to what's in JD Edwards, it becomes super complicated. So we have to take it step by step, and eventually you get there.
Sure.
It all depends on the level of complexity, but the biggest part is bringing in people from the company that understand the process. I've been in other requirements gathering or investigations where the person that really knows the answer, it doesn't get invited to the meeting because they're a lowly accountant, or no one thought to ask that person. But getting the right people in there is huge, and how quickly you can fix these issues and diagnose them.
I did open up the permissions. If you're still in attendance, you can pop a question, but I didn't. That's all the questions that I had in the Q&A. So is there anyone? Well, unless there was anything else you wanted to add, we'll pretty much wrap it up. But we do have, we will have a case study should be wrapped up and approved here. So I know our sales team will follow up with all attendees and people who registered. We'll send it's just it's kind of a document that tells a story similar to what Steve did and goes into some extra detail. But and you can always hit us up afterwards. But Steve, that's all I've got. Anything else you'd like to add? I appreciate you taking some time out, and I appreciate the attendees coming in. Any final thoughts, Steve?
No, it's just it's a great adventure doing your integrations. So good luck.